I'm quite surprised that we've made it this far without having a dedicated video for primaris lieutenants, but that ends here, cause today we're looking at the Phobos Lieutenant. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel, where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop. The Phobos Armoured Lieutenants are some relatively recent additions to the Primaris armoury. I've got to say I really like this guy with the paired combat blades and reaver mask. I think he's one of the nicest sculpts out of the entire Primaris range. I wasn't actually aware that there were two different patterns of Phobos Armour Lieutenants running around until quite recently. There's also the guy with the grav shoot and fancy bolter that originally came in the Shadow Spear set. In this video we'll be taking a look at the datasheet for these guys, any obvious buffs, synergies or combos that we can see on the tabletop, and how I would think about running them in a game of 40k. In the background, the lieutenants function as the captain's right-hand man on the battlefield, often leading specific task forces or focusing on squad-level tactics, freeing the captain up to consider the wider picture of the battle. The Phobos armoured variants in particular are experts in the infiltration and sabotage operations often undertaken by the Vanguard Space Marines, leading their battle brothers behind enemy lines to strike where the enemy is most vulnerable. So let's take a look at their datasheet. So the Phobos Armoured Lieutenant is an HQ choice for Codex Space Marines that costs 75 points in its cheapest version. He's got a fairly solid stat line for a character with movement 6, weapon skill 2 up, ballistic skill 3 up, strength and toughness 4, 5 wounds, 4 attacks, leadership 8 and a 3 up save. Unlike captains, lieutenants do not have an iron halo, so no invul save. You can take one or two of them as a single HQ choice. Usually I just tend to take one, and if you were taking two, it might just be better to take them in different slots to better fill out your battalions and other detachments. So this guy has two distinct loadouts that you can field him in, to represent the two Phobos Lieutenant models that are available from Games Workshop. The first and cheapest one is armed with a heavy bolt pistol, combat knife, smoke grenades, and gains the Reaver keyword. The combat knife is just a standard issue affair, so will mean that he'll usually have 6 attacks in the first round of close combat, when you take shock assault into account, but these will just be at strength for AP nothing. The heavy bolt pistol is like a standard bolt pistol, but with just AP -1, so a small improvement there. And the smoke grenades sort of function like a vehicle's smoke launchers, where instead of shooting, you can drop the smoke grenade and then any enemy shooting will be at -1 to hit this model until the start of your next turn. This could occasionally be helpful, particularly if he's fighting on the front lines and is likely to be exposed to return fire. I'd probably use this quite early, particularly if you think he's going to be targeted. Having more chance to soak up more enemy firepower is usually going to be better than getting that one heavy bolt pistol shot or one frag or crack grenade. Because this version has the Reaver keyword because of that scary skull mask, enemy units will suffer -1 to their leadership while this guy is within 3 inches of them, and that stacks with other Reaver units to a maximum of -3 leadership. So you could actually get some fairly serious leadership debuffs going with this guy, plus another couple of Reaver squads, which could be great in the right situation, but it is easily countered either by having small elite units, not having units that fail morale, killing your frontline terror troops, or using 2 command points to auto-pass the leadership test, but it is a nice to have. The other Phobos Lieutenant's loadout has a grav shoot, mastercrafted Oculus Bolt Carbine, and paired combat blades. The paired combat blades mean that every time you roll an unmodified 6 to hit, it will score 1 additional hit, and this maths out to be almost exactly the same as the benefit of having that combat blade that the other Reaver Lieutenant has, so he's almost exactly the same in close combat, an average of around 5 hits with his strength 4 knife. That mastercrafted Oculus Bolt Carbine, which is a bit of a mouthful, is a 24-inch bolt weapon, strength 4, AP nothing, damage 2, and your opponent won't be getting any cover saves against this gun, so a decent upgrade on the range damage output for him. This guy comes with a grav shoot, so you can deploy him via deep strike if you need to, so it could be a good way to get some lieutenant rerolls dropping down with some deep striking units if you didn't want to pay for the lieutenant with a jump pack. This version doesn't have the Reaver keyword, so no leadership shenanigans unfortunately. I think both of these loadouts are viable, it just depends whether you want to pay for deep strike and a slightly upgraded ranged weapon. I think that's fairly balanced for 6 points over the base model. In terms of special rules, he has Angels of Death for shock assault, combat doctrines, and bolter discipline for that mastercrafted Oculus bolt carbine. And of course he gets the Lieutenant reroll aura, which is a 6-inch bubble where any of your units that are within that bubble can reroll 1s to wound. Just a note on that reroll bubble, a lot of people prefer the Captain's reroll 1s bubble because it's rolls to hit and that feels better, but rerolling 1s to wound will have the exact same impact on your expected damage output as rerolling 1s to hit, which is a 1/6 increase in expected damage, or a 17% buff, depending on how you want to look at it. And of course he will give this to himself. Finally, if you do choose to take 2 of these for whatever reason, they don't have to be set up in coherency, but they are set up at the same time when you come to deploy them. One thing to note in terms of his special rules that I didn't realise was that this guy does not get concealed positions like the Phobos Captain does. So this means that this guy can't set up outside of his deployment zone like the Phobos Captain and Phobos Librarian can. To be honest, that seems a little bit weird to me, seeing as the 2 other Phobos Armoured characters can do that, but it seems that the rules want this guy to be a lot more akin to a Reaver rather than an Infiltrator or an Incursor. So overall, this guy is a standard Lieutenant model with that all-important reroll 1s to wound bubble that has some fun war gear options, reasonable melee damage against light infantry, and either a graph shoot or smoke grenades and terror troops, depending on which version you choose. So let's look at any obvious buffs and synergies that we can see with this guy. Firstly, and most obviously, is that he will be great for providing that standard damage increase to any units within 6 inches of him. You may want to be running him alongside a bunch of Phobos armed infantry, though we can quite happily buff any other unit in your army as well. He has a particular synergy with the Infiltrator squad, where they can take the comms array, which means that they can always count as being within his aura, provided both units are on the battlefield. So you could have your Infiltrators starting forwards, and this guy hanging back, maybe buffing some other units like Eliminators or some of your big guns, and he'd be able to provide those rerolls to wound to both units. I think he's quite a good solid option for buffing deep striking troops coming in, due to the option of that grav shoot, so it could be a good pair alongside things like Inceptors, or fighty melee options coming in from deep strike, such as Vanguard veterans or Terminators for example. He is slightly more expensive than the standard Lieutenant with a jump pack for this particular role. The jump pack Lieutenant is 78 points and this guy is 81, but he does come with an improved stat line, better firepower, and those paired combat blades, so does have some significant advantages, though unfortunately he can't take a powerful close combat weapon such as a Power Fist or Thunderhammer, which of course the regular Lieutenant can. So I think there are positives and negatives to both units, and there are certainly ways to buff his melee damage output with relics and warlord traits, as we'll see in a second. Let's take a look at the chapter options available to him, and what they can do for this guy. The Ultramarines love their bolt shots, so will certainly help out that bolt carbine, allowing him to fire twice at max range on the move, and they also have the Soldier's Blade relic for the combat knife version of the Lieutenant. This is quite a decent upgrade in his damage output, as to make him strength 5, AP -4, and 2 damage, turning him from a mediocre close combat threat to someone who can actually put a decent hurt on heavy infantry. White Scars is always great with disruption and distraction units like this. Being able to fall back and charge again, or charge after advancing, is really powerful, and can get infantry characters with low movement like this guy exactly where they need to be. A deep striking Phobos Lieutenant could be a decent choice for Master of Snares to tie up a enemy firepower unit, so that's an option as well. Iron Hands will of course buff this guy's durability, with that nice 6-up Feel No Pain. Raven Guard could make this guy into a much better character hunter, and could be a decent choice for putting Ex Tenebris on, their boosted sniper weapon, though he may not be the optimal choice with a ballistic skill of only 3-up. The Raven Guard also have a relic combat knife called Oppressor's End. This is +1 strength, AP -2, damage 1, but if you target characters with it, then it jumps up to damage 3. This combined with the +1 to hit and wound against enemy characters will make your Lieutenant go through characters like some sort of mini Eversaw assassin, and Raven Guard are quite useful for getting this guy where he needs to be, because you can take the combat knife loadout and use the stratagem to put him in deep strike reserve to have him jump out at the enemy lines with that blade. The Salamanders will always do pretty well for characters, having 1 reroll to hit and wound per turn, boosting those bolt shots or crack grenades thrown by this guy, and making his melee extra reliable as well. On top of this, we also have the Drake Blade, another relic combat knife replacement that can get it to be AP -4, damage 2, and can cause a mortal wound every time you make an unmodified wound roll of 6. You could combine this with either Anvil of Strength or the Imperium's Sword to break the Strength 5 barrier and make him quite a decent little murder machine against whatever he gets into close combat with. The Imperial and Crimson Fists will buff his bolter shooting. That fancy bolt gun will get extra hits on 6s and be a bit more reliable. Black Templars are quite useful for this guy because his re-rolling charge out of Deep Strike will get him into close combat a lot more reliably. Plus their Assault Doctrine is very nice when they get into it, and particularly for low strength models. The Crusader Helm could be a decent relic pick for him, adding 3 inches to that re-roll aura, and allowing you to put a nearby Black Templar squad in Assault Doctrine. And the Witch Seeker bolts could be a decent pickup for that bolt carbine as well. Blood Angels, as always, are a massive boost to his melee damage output. +1 to charge is great, +1 to wound is great, and their Assault Doctrine for extra attacks makes him even more murderous at killing infantry. This guy could be a viable alternative to drop in alongside your various fighty close combat squads to give them a reroll 1s aura, and potentially a buffing relic such as the Quake bolts to give a unit nearby +1 to hit a certain unit, or maybe that Icon of the Angel to give everyone nearby reroll charges. I think he's particularly a viable alternative to a lieutenant with a jump pack here, who's a bit more focused on killing light infantry and is a touch more durable than your standard lieutenant. Dark Angels have the option for a relic called Eye of the Unseen, which could give nearby units -1 leadership, so anyone will be -2 leadership if they're within 3 inches of the Skull-Masked Reaver version. Finally, Space Wolves are usually solid with their characters, with their boosted heroic intervention range, though you might be better off taking something with a Power Fist or Thunderhammer to make better use of that +1 to hit in close combat. In terms of book, relic and warlord traits, we could buff this guy's durability with the Armor Indomitus or the Artificer armor from the supplement books. As he's a primaris model, you could use the Voxa Spiritum to give him a +3 inch aura range if you wanted to make sure that you get the most out of that reroll 1s to wound aura. In terms of warlord traits, this guy of course gets access to the Vanguard warlord traits from the main codex, which we have already covered in our Phobos Captain review, so feel free to go back and take a look at that if you'd like to see more detail. My favourite of these are Lord of Deceit, which will allow you to redeploy 3 Chapter Phobos units and perfectly counter your opponent with them, and Shoot and Fade, which could be used to shoot a bunch of units with his reroll 1s aura, then have the Primaris Lieutenant shoot, and then Shoot and Fade allows him to move, so he could move up to another bunch of units that weren't in range of the aura to start with, and then they'll be able to profit from that aura as well. We already talked about this as well in the huge Chapter Master buff video I did a little while back, and it's a very fun tactic. In terms of stratagems, I probably wouldn't go too crazy with them on this guy, just because he's quite a cheap model really, and he isn't enormously fighty in close combat. You could consider Honour the Chapter or Only in Death, but to be honest, for the command points I'd probably save this to spend on something else or on a more fighty character. If he absolutely needs to survive the turn, you can consider Transhuman Physiology, and if you wanted a small buff to his damage output, then Gene-Wrought Might is always an option as well. As a Phobos unit, he has some interesting interactions with the Phobos Librarian, who could do things like move him up very fast with Temporal Corridor, and if you're White Scars you could also Assault. I do think that this is most probably better used on the actual big Phobos units where you get more value out of them though. You're going to be quite unlikely to get the most value out of using expensive psychic powers on such a cheap model. Obviously he works well with any other special characters that you have nearby. He'll boost their damage output, they might boost his, such as Captain or Chapter Master reroll auras, and Apothecaries can heal this guy as well. So how would I use this guy on the battlefield? Out of the 2 loadouts, my favourite one is the one with the grav shoot, as I feel like the one on foot is only really going to get any good value out of the extra points that you pay for him over the standard lieutenant if he actually gets into close combat, which he's going to find hard to do if he has to start in your deployment zone and foot slog towards the enemy. I'd be a lot more tempted by the Combat Blaze Reaver Smoke Bomb lieutenant in a Raven Guard army when I can infiltrate him and set him up right next to the enemy army. I'd ideally want to have my Jump Pack Lieutenant drop down and buff some nearby friendly shooting or assault units, probably try and charge him in to deal some damage to light infantry in the assault phase. I think he does compete fairly well with the Jump Pack Lieutenant for this role, as he's only a tiny bit more expensive, he is tougher and he is more fighty, unless you start giving the Jump Pack Lieutenant more fancy close combat weapons. Perhaps the Smoke Bomb Combat Blade Lieutenant could be useful as part of an advancing gun line, but I do think purely from a list optimization point of view, you're probably just better off saving the extra 15 points and dropping him down to a regular lieutenant on foot for just 60 points. Having said that, I do admit that he's a very cool model, And if you want to spend a few extra points on a few special rules and getting him on the tabletop, then it's really not that big a loss to your army as a whole. Let me know your thoughts on these guys. At some point in the future I might cover the other lieutenants as well, mainly in the ways that they differ to captains and the war gear options that they have available. So feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see that at a future date. Thanks for listening. Please let me know any of your thoughts and ideas down in the comments below, particularly which one of these loadouts you prefer and why. I do have a Patreon page, and if you'd like to support the channel, then feel free to check that out, the link is in the description. Again, thanks for listening, and I look forward to seeing you guys next time.